Welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex, which connects you with the world's top independent management consultants. And I'm your host, Will Bachman. And I'm so excited to be here with my guest, Gary Chan, who's an information security consultant. And we're going to talk all about information security. Gary, tell me a little bit about hacking attempts and phishing attempts over the during the coronavirus pandemic. Any change?
Hey, well, good afternoon, Will. It's a pleasure to be on the show. And to your question, yes, hacking has definitely had an increase over the past couple of months. Just to give you a few numbers, I work with a number of different organizations, and depending upon who I ask, they tell me there's a 6 times to a 9 times increase in the number of phishing attempts in March of 2020 versus prior months. So that's like a huge number. And in terms of the number of new fake COVID-19 sites per day, there are thousands that are popping up on a daily basis. So much so that the registrars now are basically trying to, they're blocking people from even registering URLs with coronavirus in it until they have an opportunity to check and talk with the person, because there's just been such a huge uptick.
And then what sort of is happening? Let's talk about the phishing schemes. Is it that people are working from home, so the hackers figure that they might be more susceptible to click on links, or what? Give us some specifics, some examples.
Sure. So I think there are a couple of questions in your question. One was, why is it that people are doing this? And the second is what they sort of look like. So I'll try to cover both of those. In terms of the issues, it's definitely a lot easier to breach home defenses than it is to breach corporate defenses. So with the number of people working from home, that's actually a boon for hackers. Also, people are using the internet more while they're working from home. And so basically, the more they use it, the more opportunities there are for hackers. Also, corporate security teams are less effective while working at home. Some may have had their budgets reduced, so they might not have the same security tools, and some may be furloughed. There are also an intentional reduction in security to meet performance requirements. So a lot of companies will estimate the number of people who work from home on a regular basis, which would be some small, usually single-digit percentage of their company workforce. And when it basically multiplies by tenfold, they all of a sudden don't have enough servers, they don't have enough the security tools, not enough licenses. All of these things become a problem. And so what they do is they intentionally drop the security in order for people to continue to have fast performance to be able to log in from home. And also law enforcement is pretty strained right now. So in some parts of the country, as you've probably read in the news, there are a lot of law enforcement officers are out sick. And on top of that, even the ones that are not sick, right now they're just busy doing other things. So basically your cost value analysis for the hacker has, completely changed. The value of hacking stays the same, but the cost is now much lower because it's a lot easier to breach those home defenses. Companies are sort of dropping their security, and they're not going to be as likely to be caught by law enforcement because they're not paying attention to it. So essentially, that means the bad guys have now increased their investments. They're buying more tools, they're doing more hacking, and there are more people that have come out of the woodwork because it's now, worth it for them. So all of these things really culminates in a large amount of change in COVID-19 in favor of the hackers. In terms of the fake emails that you had mentioned, they come out from the WHO, from the CDC. Well, not really from them, but pretending to be from them, and those are pretty common ones.
What are some ways to defend ourselves? And you've come up with a really nice page here with 12 different tips. Let's go through those of how can we as independent consultants protect both ourselves as well as our client and the client data that we're entrusted with.
Sure. I'll sort of list out 12 items, and we can talk about any of these in more depth. So with the understanding that with this audience, everybody's pretty much an individual, I threw out the really expensive tools and just sort of focused in on what I would consider to be a pretty good baseline. And here they are. The first, back up your files. The second is know your legal obligations. The third is take a security awareness training. The fourth is to have email security. The fifth is to follow good authentication practices. The sixth is to use anti-malware software. The seventh is to use secure Wi-Fi. The eighth is to update and patch your software. That includes your operating system. The ninth is to use secure mobile devices. The 10th is to use encryption. 11 is to secure assets on the internet. And the 12th is to purchase cyber insurance.
Okay, so let's go through each one of these a little bit. So great list, and if you visit, tell us the URL, and I'll include this link in the show notes. Gary's put together just a link where you can go and actually grab this page. What's the link that people should go to?
Sure, they can go to alfizo.com/unleashed. So Alfizo is spelled ALFIZO.com/unleashed.
Okay, and right there at that page, which Gary set up just for us, for listeners of the show, you can grab this Information Security Basics for Independent Consultants 2-pager with a nice summary page and then some detailed list. So you don't need to write these down. Go to that link. So let's talk through the list a little bit. So back up your data. So why is that important, and how do you recommend people do it?
Sure. Well, backing up the data is very important because you never know what will happen. Aside from maybe you made a mistake and you accidentally deleted it, some file that's important to you, to having ransomware, which will essentially encrypt your data so that you can't get to it. It's really important to have a separate backup and have that separate from your PC. So there are a lot of different services online that you can upload to. You may even have a subscription that comes with whatever it is that you have. I think a lot of people use like Office 365 or Google G Suite, and they come with OneDrive and Google Drive respectively. So you can upload some of your files there. But there are a number of different places that you could do that. And I would suggest keeping at least 6 months worth of history, because what will happen is if you do unfortunately get ransomware and it encrypts your files, if you don't have a history and it only keeps the most recent file, then unfortunately your backup that you have is also going to be encrypted. So that's a very key item, is to just make sure that you have a version history in whatever solution that you choose, and keep those backups regularly. So then you can recover from pretty much anything, really.
And if someone, let's say, is using like Dropbox or Box.net, if they're putting all their files in, let's say, Dropbox or Box.net, are those, so everything's getting synced to the cloud, are those solutions meet your requirements, or are there issues with those?
As long as they keep history, and I think that they do, then it does meet what I would suggest.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and what is your perspective on keeping like a physical backup on maybe an external hard drive? What's your take on that?
So I would suggest that you do that as well. I know that a lot of people don't. They like using the cloud because it's it really is a lot easier.
Yeah.
Really, as many backups as you can, and whether you keep the better, right? So if you have 2 different services that you back up to, that's better than just doing one. One of the real benefits of having a physical hard drive, like I actually do that as well. I'll back up to a separate physical device and then disconnect it from the PC, is because now, even if you get malware, it's really not going to affect your backup. The ransomware, some of the more sophisticated ones, and especially if you're the unfortunate target of a nation state, hopefully none of us are, then what they'll do is they'll typically look for your backups and destroy them before they sort of give you your ransomware screen to tell you that your stuff has been compromised. So if you have it on a separate machine, or rather a separate hard drive, that protects you from that. But I would say as an independent consultant, it may not, you're less likely to run into that scenario. You're much more likely to run into that scenario if you are a bigger business where the hackers are intentionally trying to harm you.
Okay. So definitely back up on the cloud. All right, let's see. Know your legal obligations. Say a little bit about that. And we're not giving it legal advice here, but maybe give us some hint of what some of our legal obligations are.
Sure. I think it really depends, or it does depend a lot on the type of data that you're collecting. So if you're collecting, patient healthcare data, if you have, credit card numbers, if you have social security numbers of people, oftentimes you might have it for if you had, employees or maybe you have contractors and things like that. These are all important things that you need to keep safe and that you have a legal obligation to, store securely. So without going into a lot of details, because as you mentioned, we're not here to give legal advice. The idea is that you have to know what type of data that you're collecting, and then know what legal obligations you have, which will often be based on both your jurisdiction, so like where you're living, whether it's by the country or by state, as well as the type of information that you specifically have. So very common things to consider are HIPAA for healthcare, PCI DSS if you do anything with credit cards, NIST 800-171 if you sell to the federal government. You also have a lot of privacy regulations and laws. So like the California Consumer Privacy Act, if you are in California. If you're a financial institution, there are a number of things for that. New York State, for example, has some very specific ones for financial institutions. So there's just so many out there. Once you know kind of the jurisdiction that applies to you, as well as the type of data you have, you can then look up which laws and regulations apply to you. And then separate from that, the only other element is if your customer has specifically asked you to meet a particular requirement. That is something that you would also have to do.
Okay, great. Take awareness training. Tell me a little bit about that. And you have a link there on the page. Talk about awareness training.
Sure. So I think it's important for all of us to have a baseline understanding of security, especially since most of us get breached because of things that we do. It's not necessarily because they found our machine and they're just hammering away at a vulnerability on it. More likely is they just sent out a mass email. They see who clicked, who gave up their username and password. These are all sort of low table stakes that we can all sort of address through training. So we can take some, phishing awareness training and understand, some of the things that might happen over email or a number of other things, whether they be scams or going to a banking website that looks like it's a banking website but really isn't. So you can take some of these videos. You can find them on YouTube. I also have included in here a link. They're free videos. It's a freemium, but really the videos are that you need are really all free. They're made by a partner of mine, and you can watch them. They're about a minute long. You can watch 5 or 10 of them, and then there are also some that are specific to certain regulations. So if you have some interest in learning a little bit more about security, I would highly encourage you to look at some of these videos that are online.
Okay. So number 4 is have email security. Tell me about that one a little bit.
Sure. Well, a lot of people get phished. And actually, there are a lot of really fun statistics about it. So, for example, the department that is most often successfully phished in an organization is the HR department because they get so many resumes in Word form, and they open those and they have malicious macros in them and things like that. But really, we all get phishing emails, and I'm sure we've all gotten them in our mailboxes over time, if not on a weekly basis, certainly on a monthly basis. And so there are a lot of tools out there that can help us basically weed out all of these bad emails. And they usually come as part of your email package. But I mention it specifically because if you use a sort of a free, actually depending upon the service, whether or not it's free, they sometimes come with their own email security tools. And if you don't have those, it's really something you should consider purchasing. I know that Office 365 and G Suite already come with a lot of spam and anti-phishing tools that are built in. So if you have that, you're probably good to go. But if you're using a service that you're getting very cheaply from somewhere else, you may or may not have that. So it's just worth looking into because they can really help you a lot, because we don't always catch those phishing emails on our own.
So a lot of listeners of the show, I think, use one of those two. But like, what would an example of if you're using some other service, what would an example of the email security service be like that you would get? Like, where would you go to get that?
Sure. You would probably just need to talk with your email service provider. They may offer it as an additional add-on. There are a lot of different tools like FortiGateway. It's from Fortinet. Microsoft has, I think it's called IronPort. There are just so many of them out there, but you wouldn't necessarily purchase one of those specifically for you because those things are usually across, all of the email accounts for an entire sort of email system. So you would have to go to your email provider and simply ask them, hey, do you offer this? And they would tell you whichever one that they've partnered with, because usually they would only install one. They wouldn't be able to give you a selection, and you probably wouldn't be able to sign up on your own and, point it over to there, if that makes sense. So that's you just have to work with your provider.
Yeah, so that's separate than like the Norton antivirus that you have on your computer. Then it's a separate.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you'd want to catch it on the server side, not so much what you've described as installing on the PC or on the device. Although that is helpful, they're usually a lot less effective because they don't have a lot of the extra features. They may not be live. There are a lot of additional things that go on in the background that the cloud tools and things that are built into the data centers have that you won't have if you installed it on your own PC.
All right. Follow good authentication procedures. What does that mean?
Sure. So the most important element of it is really having multi-factor authentication. So that's when you get not only your password, but you also have like another token that sometimes is like an SMS that's sent to your phone, or maybe you're using something like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator that gives you this rotating code that you can enter into the website. So I definitely recommend multi-factor authentication because a lot of times hackers only have access to like your username and your password, and then having that extra step sort of pushes you down the list of priorities because these guys are just looking for the low-hanging fruit. So if you've got multi-factor authentication, yes, it's possible to hack you if I really wanted to, for example, but it's far less likely. I'm just going to go, as the bad guy, if I were the bad guy, to just go to the next guy who didn't have that turned on. So I would say multi-factor authentication is really number one. And then I also mention, single sign-on solutions because a lot of people write down their passwords. And, honestly, I can't remember, my passwords for 1,000 different websites, especially if I'm supposed to have a different password for every single one. So there are things like password vault and as well as single sign-on type of tools. So I've listed one. It's called AppsCo. Essentially, you log into that with multi-factor authentication, but then it can store your username and passwords for everything else and actually log you in directly if you wanted to. So that actually reduces a step. And the reason that I like that is really because people are lazy. I'm lazy, too. And, the easier that we make it for people to be able to log into accounts, the more likely they're going to use the tool. Password vaults are fantastic, but then sometimes, depending on the tool, you have to copy and paste that, so to speak, copy and paste that username and password into the other website. So, that adds an additional step, which means that people might not use it. So that's why I sort of stress single sign-on, because that seems to have a much better adoption rate.
Yeah. I just did an episode a few episodes ago about LastPass and password managers. And I'm not sure if we're talking about the same thing, but LastPass will allow you sign into that. And at least if you're using the Chrome on the browser, you have this plug-in thing, and then it will sign into your websites for you. And it also will, if you have a new site that you're signing up, it'll generate one of those strong passwords with capital and lowercase and numbers and symbols, and then store it for you automatically.
That's fantastic. LastPass is a very popular one as well.
Yeah. Okay. Use anti-malware software. So are there any ones in particular that you recommend?
There are a ton of anti-malware software out there. You can, I think you even mentioned one like Norton earlier. So there are built into Windows and now Mac, there's already built-in anti-malware. If you want, there's a lot of research out there that you can actually find that will talk about the pros and cons of different ones. I personally like to also purchase some other ones. I use Cylance myself, which is uses artificial intelligence to sort of predict and identify malware. So I like that one, but really there are quite a large number of them. Avast is a very popular one as well, McAfee. And what I would suggest is if you have a subscription to internet at your home, which I think all of us probably do, the ISP, or the internet service provider, typically offers you a free antivirus software as part of your package. So if you go to their website, they will basically give you like 10 free licenses or however many your subscription gives to you. And I would say just using that is probably good enough, especially as an independent consultant. If you were a bigger business, I would probably say that it would make sense to invest in some higher grade ones. But really for home use, I think whatever the internet service provider offers or whatever you purchase from Best Buy is probably sufficient.
Okay. So number 7, use secure Wi-Fi. Does that just mean having a password protected one, or is there something that's more complicated? Wi-Fi's always seem super complicated, harder than they should be to set up, and to go in there. And I've never been able to figure out how to reprogram the password on it. I just use the one out of the box. But how do you make sure that you have secure Wi-Fi going?
Sure. Well, I'll start with what you mentioned, which is to have a good password. When you set up the Wi-Fi, and of course this depends on your router model number, assuming you're using a router, you'll want to set the protocol to WPA2. So the protocol and the algorithm is really just it determines how complex and how difficult it is for a hacker to break it. WPA2 is the most secure one at this time. So set that, set a good password, at least 8 characters, if not longer. But I think more importantly, what I was referring to was really where you connect, right? So if you're connecting at home, that's probably the safest environment that you'll be in. But if you travel a lot, you'll often get Wi-Fi, say at the airport or maybe at your hotel. And it's very convenient, and also it's just especially and also useful to be able to connect to free Wi-Fi, right? When you're there. The problem with that is that anybody can set up a Wi-Fi and publish the SSID to be the same as whatever the airport is. So whenever you're connecting to, free Wi-Fi Boston or free Wi-Fi St. Louis or, whatever it is at the airport, you really don't know if you're connecting to the official one or if you're connecting to one that a hacker set up. And you won't be able to tell very easily. So The problem is, even if there is a password, but you're connecting to the bad guy's machine, that bad guy can see all of your stuff, right? So the password really only keeps people from being able to connect to that particular Wi-Fi. It doesn't actually protect the data on your Wi-Fi. So let me explain what that means. If you're in a hotel or airport or wherever, and they give you a sheet of paper that says, okay, connect to this Wi-Fi, here's the password, and everybody in that building knows the password, that means that everybody in the building can see what you're doing whenever you connect to the Wi-Fi, because you all have the password. So, that's a bit of an oversimplification, but that is that password really is just keeping you from logging on to it. It doesn't actually protect all of your data. What protects your data is the fact that you're using encryption, for example, between your machine and bankofamerica.com, for example. It's that encryption that helps when you're going from the website to the website, but the password for the Wi-Fi itself is completely separate and has nothing to do with that. If you're connecting to Wi-Fi, make sure that it is really the real Wi-Fi that you're expecting to connect to, and then also turn on your VPN. So if you have a company VPN, use that because that'll tunnel through your company and go through your company security defenses. Otherwise, you can purchase your own private VPN as well. So like I use private internet access, but there are a ton of different, VPNs out there that you can use. And that will help also, make sure that your data stays protected, even if you are connected to sort of a hacker's, Wi-Fi.
So if you're just on a free Wi-Fi, someone else who's also on that Wi-Fi could theoretically see all the keystrokes or the data that you're uploading and downloading?
Yes, it's. I'll be a little bit more specific since you asked. Anybody else that's on the same network should be able to see like the packets that you send. So they can't see your keystrokes, right? When you're just typing on your computer, that stays on your computer. But the moment that you sort of send any data over the internet, that gets converted into digital packets, and then they can see it, right? So those packets, as they get transferred, depending upon how they're being transferred, the bad guy can see it. So I'll give you two examples to make it a little bit clearer. If I'm going to a website that doesn't have a security certificate, so like the beginning is like HTTP and not HTTPS, so you don't see the little lock icon that's up in the browser. If I go to a website like that, and then I type in my username and password, that gets sent clear text. So as somebody else on the same network, when you click submit, I can see that you're going to that website. I can see whatever it is that you're, sending your username and password. And I can also see what that website sends back to you, right? So I can actually basically re-render whatever it is that you're looking at your computer screen on my computer screen by looking at those packets. But if you're going to a website that has HTTPS, which is what's called a secure website, then those packets are encrypted. So even if I'm able to see that you're talking to bankofamerica.com, I can't see the data that's being transmitted between you and Bank of America and from Bank of America to you. There are exceptions to that, of course, but at a high level, that is how it works.
Okay, so think about getting a VPN, and if you're an independent, maybe you get a private VPN. And just explain to me a little bit, what is a VPN? What does that mean? How much roughly does it cost? And then does it slow down the Wi-Fi? Like what does it do?
Sure. So VPNs. So what happens is it's called a virtual private network. Let's say that I've got my PC at home, and whenever I'm surfing the internet, it goes out through my cable modem, and it looks like it's coming from my house. I'm in St. Louis, and it shows that it's coming out from St. Louis. If I have a VPN, what that does is, whether it's a corporate VPN or whether it's a private VPN that I purchase, it'll route all of my traffic from my house to that other place, and then from that place, it then gets routed out to the internet. So if I go to Bank of America from my house without VPN, it goes straight from me to Bank of America. But if I am on a VPN, it goes from me to the sort of middle guy to that VPN provider. Then it goes from there to Bank of America. So that's called a virtual private network. And the reason that this helps with the situation that we were talking about earlier is because if I'm not on a VPN, then whenever I send the packets, if I'm on the free airport Wi-Fi, if I send the data packet from my PC over that through the hacker's machine, they can see me talk to, Bank of America or whoever it is that I'm trying to talk to. If I do the VPN, what that does is that sets up a connection so that even though it's routing through the hacker's computer, it'll be encrypted. So it encrypts all of those packets between my computer and that sort of private VPN provider. And then from that provider, it then goes out to the internet. And so even though it's going through the hacker can't see anything because it's guaranteeing that all of my packets are encrypted. So one of the benefits of that is that you can pretend like you're in a different country, for example. So if you are in Europe and you want to watch Netflix in the US, you can use a private VPN, go through a server that's in the US, and then be able to stream Netflix from that. So that's sort of just an additional benefit, if you will. There are drawbacks, like things are a little bit slower when you're on a VPN, but anyway, a lot of different pros and cons. In terms of the costs that you asked about, they're usually cost a few dollars a month, and so there are a lot that are actually much more expensive because they do a lot more, and there are some that are free. I do not recommend using any of the ones that are free. Even if they're legitimate, the problem is that there's so many people using them that it'll be really, really slow. But more importantly, there are a lot of people offering free VPNs, and really all they're doing is they're counting on you to connect to them. So they're the hacker in the middle, and you're encrypting all the traffic between you and the hacker, but you're giving the hacker all of your data. So don't use any of the free ones would be a recommendation of mine.
Okay. And when you use a VPN, do you kind of go to it just via a regular browser, or how do you actually get to the VPN?
Sure. So the VPN for pretty much all of them is very similar. So as I mentioned before, I use private internet access. If you go to that website, you can download an application which you have to pay for, but you install it on your PC, and then you turn it on, and you can specify where you want to be connecting to, and then it'll route all of your traffic through there. So whether you're using your email or whether you are using your browser or anything, as long as the VPN is on and that's turned on by the software that you install, then all of your traffic is encrypted going through that VPN provider. And so any application you use on your PC that goes over the internet will have that VPN protection, we'll call it.
So it just kind of runs in the background. So you just use Chrome or Safari or whatever, just like you normally would, and that's just kind of running in the background.
That's correct, yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about number 8, update and patch. How do we make sure that we're doing that?
Sure. That one's pretty straightforward, especially nowadays. Pretty much all of the operating systems and much of the software that we install, they auto update. So even I've got an Apple Watch and it auto updates by itself. I don't need to press any buttons. So I would just say, don't turn that feature off for your operating systems or applications. Let it update. A lot of times people refuse to reboot their computer. because they're in the middle of something or whatever. That's fine, but reboot it later that night. A lot of times, what happens is that whenever Microsoft, for example, issues a patch, they'll come out on what's called Patch Tuesday. As soon as that patch gets released, a lot of researchers and hackers will look at that patch to figure out, they'll reverse engineer it to figure out what the vulnerability was in Windows. And so those guys work pretty quickly, because as soon as they're able to figure it out, why they had to have the patch, they also know how to exploit the computer system. And that's when they start coding and writing all of these malicious applications to get to all of the computers that have not been patched. So if you don't reboot your computer, if the patch requires a reboot and you don't do it, then you effectively don't have the patch, even if you do have the patch, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
maybe almost make a habit of don't just hibernate. Turn your darn computer off once per day when you go to bed at night.
That's exactly what I do.
Yeah. Okay. How about number 9? Secure mobile devices. Now I have a mobile device. I have an iPhone here that we're talking on. Is that secure, or do I need to do something to make it secure?
Sure. So I would say there are two things that I would suggest for mobile phones. The first is to lock your devices when you're not using them. So if you have Touch ID, Face ID, or just a PIN, or if you've got an Android and you're sort of doing that pattern sort of lock, all of those are fine. Just make sure that you do have an auto lock, after 5 minutes of inactivity or whatever it is that you want to do. Lock your devices when you're not using them, and then have a way to remotely wipe the device. Because a lot of times what happens is that people lose their devices, and once you've lost it, you've kind of lost it, right? So you can use, like Apple phones, for example, they have this Find My, it's called Find My, and you can go to the website, I think it's like iCloud.com or something like that, and then you can look for your device, and then you can remotely wipe it. And that, will at least give you peace of mind that your data wasn't lost. Maybe it was lost, but I mean that that someone else didn't take it, even if you lost your, hardware device.
Okay. Number 10 is use encryption. What we talked about using encrypted websites or secure websites, but you're talking about like encrypting your hard drive?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I would encrypt anything that you don't, if you wouldn't publish it to the internet, I would encrypt it. There, with Windows, there is BitLocker. If you have, I think it's like Windows Pro and above, that comes with BitLocker, you can use that. If you have the home version, you don't have BitLocker. You can use other encryption solutions. One of the ones that I really like is called VeraCrypt, VeraCrypt. And VeraCrypt is something you can download for free. And it takes a little bit of learning, but the point is that you can use it to encrypt your whole hard drive, or basically you can create what's called a container, which is like a mini hard drive, a virtual hard drive. You can think of it that way. And any files that you put into that virtual hard drive will be encrypted, so that even if somebody steals your laptop, at least your data, even if you lost your data, the other guy can't actually read your data. So I would definitely use encryption whenever possible. Those are a couple of examples that you can use.
Okay. And how does that actually work to get one of those? So you download the software, and is it you just type in a password or something, and then it encrypts everything, or how do you do anything differently when you're operating a computer, or once you install the software, it just kind of operates in the background? What does it look like for someone who has not done it before?
Sure. So I think the one for Windows, the BitLocker, especially if you have the Windows Pro, it's already there, and you can always upgrade your Windows version. That one's the easiest one by far to use. You just type BitLocker, and then you say encrypt everything, and it just encrypts your whole hard drive. So the key to logging in is basically whatever password that you use to log into your PC. And then it'll, as you're using it, everything is like normal, right? So this really prevents your files from being stolen. If if it's on a laptop and you have your computer locked, they won't be able to get in, and everything there is encrypted. If you don't have it encrypted, but you have a lock on it, I'll just make this point, is I can still get all of your data because I actually, I know how. I don't actually need your password to access any of the files on your computer if you don't have it encrypted.
Oh, is that right?
And this is what hackers can do. So that's why you need encryption. In terms of the other free ones, like PGP is a very common one as well. But you can get some of these encryption solutions. Unfortunately, you have to read the instructions because they were built. Really, they do function. They function very well, but they're a little harder to use. They're not very user friendly, so you have to read the tutorials that come with them.
Yeah, I don't think I want to do that. And number 11, you said you suggest to secure assets on the internet. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So if you have anything on the internet that you store, and the easiest ones are things like OneDrive, Dropbox, all the things that we talked about on the internet, or if you do things in Facebook, or if you have your own website, just make sure that you're securing them in the best possible way. I know that's very vague, but the point is that every application has a very different way of securing it. So it's impossible for me to tell you exactly how to do every single application. But all of the major applications come with some sort of manual or guide that explain, what are all the settings and things that you can do in order to make it as secure as possible. And amongst some of those things usually is something like multi-factor authentication. But there are things that you can do for every application that you'll want to use to make sure that they're secure. Unfortunately, a lot of hackers nowadays, they don't bother trying to hack your device if they know that it's in the cloud, because if I try to hack your device, that means I actually have to have your device and then I have to hack it. But if it's in the cloud, I don't actually have to have your device because I can access it from anywhere, and then I can just hack it from there. So like if I want to get to your email, I'm not going to bother trying to steal your physical computer and then, take your emails from there. I'm just going to go to Gmail or whatever it is that you're using and try to hack in from there, right? So make sure that you have difficult to guess, sort of recovery, recovery question answers, things like that. So there are a lot of things that you have to do, but it depends on your specific application or website.
Okay. And finally, buy cyber insurance. So what is cyber insurance?
Sure. So cyber insurance is essentially something that any individual or business can buy that will help cover you in the event that you lost data. So just be cognizant of what the policy says, because depending upon what you buy, you might only be covering security for yourself, or you could also be covering it for your clients, which is what I would think that most people on this show would be interested in. And essentially, as long as you have security protections in place that, and this will all vary based on whatever insurance provider that you get. As long as you meet certain requirements, you show that you are, doing some level of due diligence. You're not just, emailing around people's social security numbers, for example, then you can get coverage for your business up to a certain dollar amount, for a yearly premium. And that's very helpful if you think that you have sensitive information and you want to make sure that you're covered. Just be really clear on what the policy does cover and the types of information, for example, patient health care or credit card data or whatever it is that you're covering, that's part of the policy.
Wow. Okay. Super helpful list. A lot of action items probably for many of us. What could you tell us just a little bit about your practice, Gary, about the types of clients that you work with and the types of services that you offer?
I'm an information security management consultant. And what I do is I work with businesses to understand what their cyber risk profile is. So depending upon their industry, depending upon how big they are, depending upon what type of information they have, for example, we can identify and figure out what are the ways what are the types of issues they may run into, and then we can identify the best sort of defenses for that. So my typical audience, or I guess companies that I work with, are typically highly regulated organizations, which will typically be banks. And so that is my typical client, but really it goes with anybody who has any type of information that they want to keep protected.
What are banks doing now in the coronavirus pandemic with employees working from home? How are they dealing with all the security risks?
So right now, they're really just following the same protocols that they have before. Unfortunately, a lot of these guys are squeezed pretty tightly, so they're trying to find ways to reduce their costs at this particular time. What's interesting about, I guess, banks, and the reason why they typically need security services, is that they have a legal obligation to do certain things. So they actually aren't allowed to turn things off. So really what they're doing today is the exact same thing as what they were doing before COVID-19.
So their employees are kind of logging into the bank via some sort of Citrix or VPN kind of thing, where it's more secure than if employees that are just like logging into a corporate email or something that are not under that strict requirements.
That's correct. Yes. So yeah, banks, because they're regulated, they have that. What I will say is that there are other organizations which I'm starting to get calls on that are not banks. So because what has happened is when they start to rush, I would say rush really, to work from home in March, what happened is that they would lower their security standards or not even think about it. And then now they're running into problems. And so companies with a lot more to lose. So for example, law firms, they have a lot of intellectual property there. They have a lot of non-disclosure type of things that you definitely don't want to get out of that. But because they're much less regulated than other industries, they have a lot more leeway to reduce the security in times of crisis, I guess, when they need to move quickly for functionality. But now they're finding that with the increase of hackers, because of this sort of trend, they have problems that they need to address. So it's actually been quite interesting to see how COVID-19 has, for about a month, actually significantly decreased the amount of work that I had, but that was very brief, and now it's like gone way back up. So it's just kind of interesting.
Okay. Yeah, boy, law firms like the Panama Papers and all, if a law firm gets hacked, a lot of stuff comes out. So
yeah. And I'll tell you, there's a very interesting use case. Whether it's legal or not, I don't know, but at least from a technical perspective, I think it's very interesting. So you know that there are ways that marketing people or salespeople can sort of track emails and whether or not they're open or not. So what some companies will do is they'll send like a tracker to opposing counsel or whatever of the organization that they're suing. And then if that organization forwards the email to an insurance company, well, that first company could actually see that going on and could see that email got forwarded to insurance. Because you can look at like the IP address and figure out, who does this belong to and where it is and so on and so forth. So then they become much more aggressive at seeking a payout because they know that the insurance company is involved. So it actually, you can use these sorts of tools to do very interesting things. And then from a security perspective, I get called to say, how do I prevent them from knowing that I'm contacting my insurance company? Right? So it's very interesting, the use cases that people are coming up with, and they're getting a lot more creative by the day.
Wow. So, gosh, Gary, thank you so much. This has been incredibly informative and really important that while, folks are scrambling to, rescue their business and develop plans, we need to be more vigilant than ever on cybersecurity. So, uh, you gave the email address, you gave the website before, but mention it again. Where can people go and find you online? And if you want to give a Twitter or account or handle or any other thing, where's the best places for people to find you?
Sure. I think my website's probably the best place. So that's Alfizo, ALFIZO.com/unleashed. And I've got a contact form on there that you can use. You can also download a copy of the 12 sort of notes that I had, the 12 activities for security that we talked about on this podcast. My email address is gchan@alfizo.com. So gchan@alfizo.com. And I just want to thank you very much for your time, Will. I love hearing your show, and I'm so thrilled to be one of your interviewees on it as well.
Gary, thanks a lot. This was really fantastic discussion, and really appreciate you coming on the show.
All right. Well, have a great day.